now to the ongoing row of the availability of a new drug called Kalydeco, which is aimed at improving and prolonging the lives of people who have cystic fibrosis. It's not widely available as it's apparently way too expensive for the state to pay for it. So who makes these decisions about what price lives and how are they made? That's what we'll be discussing in a few moments. First, though, we've been talking to one woman who is directly affected. Barry O'Kelly has this report.
This drug could potentially double life expectancy for people with CF, so it could in fact give people an extra 29.2 years of their life. I mean, like, that's the kind of thing, you can't put money on that.
New innovative therapy comes at a very high price, and the cost of this drug is in the region of €234,000 per person per year.
It's not unusual for two members of the same family to have cystic fibrosis. But what is unusual is the difference in the treatments afforded to Anthony and Katie Murphy. Anthony has managed to get access to a new drug called Kalydeco as part of a medical trial, but his sister is unable to receive the drug under the Irish public health system.
I can't say I don't get jealous. I get extremely jealous of the fact that I can't benefit from them yet, but it is fantastic that he has benefited so well. Within 2 weeks of going on the drug, his lung function went up into the 90s, and it has stayed there over the course of the 2 years that he's been on it. So I suppose in effect, Kalydeco has given him 30 or 40% of his lung back. He hasn't had a single chest infection since starting on Kalydeco, so he hasn't been hospitalised once. He's much happier and his future looks a lot brighter now.
Katie has to rely on the standard treatment for cystic fibrosis.
I would do nebulizers every morning and every evening, so they take approximately an hour. As I am getting older, it's just getting harder. Your treatments are getting harder and it's taking up more time, and exercise is becoming more difficult to do, and, you know, I will get more infections than I would have previously.
Clinical trials for Kalydeco found it could dramatically improve the lifespan of someone like Katie.
I know it's a huge expense, but this drug could potentially double life expectancy for people with CF, so it could in fact give people an extra 29.2 years of their life. I mean, like, that's the kind of thing, you can't put money on that. Like, it's phenomenal, and I think it's nothing that any of us thought we'd see in our lifetime. So I think, you know, everybody involved needs to just do their best to get this available immediately.
The NHS in England recently agreed to buy Kalydeco, but Ireland has so far refused to purchase the drug on cost grounds, even though it could have real benefits for an estimated 120 people with the condition.
There's no question that this drug works, and it's a new innovative therapy. And the cost of this drug is in the region of €234,000 per person per year. And with over 120 people eligible for the treatment because they have the cystic fibrosis G551D mutation, then we're talking about a budget impact of approximately €28 million per year.
In the past, the state tended to accept the price charged for new drugs, but it now makes assessments on price before agreeing to pay for these medications.
First of all, it is true that the number of assessments we do now are greater than in a few years back. For example, in 2006 we assessed something like 6 products, whereas last year we assessed 40 for value for money. But I would have argued that we should have been doing that in any event to ensure that we are getting the best value for our taxpayers' money.
While the state has opened negotiations to try to get a cheaper price from the makers of Kalydeco, Katie is facing into an uncertain future.
I'm hoping for what every 23-year-old girl is hoping for. Like, I want a long and healthy life. I'm in a long-term relationship. We have plans for our future, you know, I don't know, like marriage, children. They're the kind of things that every girl thinks about, and I think Kalydeco is my key to getting them kind of things, making my plans a reality.
Very impressive, Katie Murphy there, finishing off Barry O'Kelly's report. I'm joined in studio by the Chair in Health Policy and Management for Trinity here in Dublin, Professor Charles Normand, and Philip Wadgey, the CEO of Cystic Fibrosis Ireland. Look, I think we've got a bit of an idea there, but how important is this drug?
Well, it's probably the most important drug that's come along for cystic fibrosis. It's the first drug that actually addresses the underlying causes of cystic fibrosis. Before all other drugs really just treat the symptoms, so it's a real game changer. It's absolutely essential for our members that we get access to this drug.
And just to spell out, is it for that 10% of CF sufferers who have the Celtic gene mutation? It won't help everyone who has CF, is that correct?
That's correct. I think that's a very important point. But there are more people with the Celtic gene in Ireland than anywhere else in the world. It's 10% of the CF population, which is about 120 people. But there's only 4% of the CF population in the world have this. So, in fact, there's only 3,500 people in the world have this type of cystic fibrosis.
And how many of the 10% in this country who have the Celtic gene mutation, how many of them are actually getting this drug at the moment? I
would reckon there's probably about 20 who were involved in the clinical trials, and they've continued on. But as Katie has said, everybody else with that particular gene mutation must get access to that drug as soon as possible. I mean, that film just starkly showed it, didn't it, Charles Norman? You have Katie and her brother Anthony. He's on it, she's not. He's much better, she's not. How are these decisions made, though?
Well, I think the decisions are going to be made one way or another on all sorts of access to treatment. We always will ration. We do ration at the moment. Really, the question is, do we ration in a systematic way or do we ration in a way that's arbitrary? And what we're seeing in this case is the effects of an attempt to do this rationing on a more systematic basis. Now, of course, in a situation like this turns out to be something that has a lot of difficulties because this is a particular population, it's a very small population, and any drug roughly costs the same amount to develop, but this has been developed for a very small population, so you'd never expect it to be something that would be as profitable for a company as others would be. But I mean, decisions, like, it's so effective, it's like 30 years more can be added onto their lives. Well, I mean, that is a major decision, isn't it, to not give somebody this drug, because it can transform double their life. Well, we would hope it will, and I would hope that a way will be found to get access to this drug for these people. The thing we have to bear in mind is the price being charged is not something that comes out of thin air. This is a negotiation. This is a process of decision-making that goes on. How much is it again? They're saying 235,000 or something in that region per person per year. Now, what, of course, the drug companies need to do is to recoup the cost of the research and development during that period when they have a patent. And that's why they're looking always for fairly high prices. Does it really need to be that expensive? Well, if access is not given to the population here, they'll get absolutely nothing for it. So, on one hand, this is part of an ongoing discussion about what the price should be. There have been similar discussions in other countries about what the price should be. But it's just when, I suppose, you look at Katie Murphy, that is a life decision somebody makes for her. She was saying she's looking forward to her future, and I'm not personalising it to you, but those decisions are just quite extraordinary that people make. Will she live or will she not? Well, indeed, but of course, we make those decisions, we just often don't make them in an open and transparent way. Could I come in here? I think it's careful to make a distinction between rationing of drugs and the control of drug prices. And I think it's worth pointing out that we spent €2 billion last year on drugs. So, put in that perspective, the cost of this drug is not as expensive as you would seem. It's also the case that people on this drug are less likely to go into hospitals. So, the government's going to make a lot of savings there as well. But I don't think we should be rationing drugs to those who can afford it, or because a drug is too expensive. I think we need to control the drugs by making sure we get the best price for the drugs. And we support the government to get the best price possible for this drug. But at the end of the day, we want to see this drug made available to our members. Is it true that next year there's going to be a drug that will actually make a very, very big difference to the other 90% of CF sufferers? And it's worth pointing out, we have the highest instance of CF in the world, 3 times the United States and Europe. That's right. There's quite interesting trials going on at the minute. Unfortunately, they're not quite the same standard as Kalydeco for the 10%, but they're still very encouraging, and it sends out a beacon of hope to all people with cystic fibrosis in Ireland, and it does show the importance of investing in health research, both in America and in Ireland, and indeed our clinicians in Ireland played a very important role in getting this drug to market. Do they weigh up, I suppose, as Philip was talking about, they're like the amount it will cost, I suppose, to look after someone who's ill, constantly being in hospital, the price of that to the state, plus the price of the actual drug? Is it done like mathematics? Yeah. It is done like that. The report that this has been based on has gone through this systematically, looking at what the trials are showing, trying to simulate and predict from that what would happen in the longer term. And there's always a lot of uncertainty about that, but the better end of the assumptions there would be really very good. But and they look at the savings you'll make through people not having so much of other treatment and so on. So that's all taken into account. And in the end, the decision has to be made on the basis of some things will be paid for and some things will not. And I'm not wanting to get down to this particular case because it's obviously a very, very difficult and a very distressing one potentially. But the principles still have to be, it's better for us to try and spend the money as wisely as we can rather than to allow it to be just arbitrary. And we've got a lot of history of making very arbitrary decisions. I think we need to try and make the decisions on a more systematic basis.
I think the proof is here and the evidence is here for this drug, so I think it needs to be funded by the government.
No, I think there's no argument that this drug is one that we would really want to try and see was made available to the people who need it. The question really is how can we ensure that it gets provided for these people without it displacing so many other useful things we want to do. Well, we have to have these arguments, we have to look at the evidence, we have to look at the longer term outcomes of this.
Well, I don't accept that it does displace treatment to other people. I think if we make more savings, the government is still using a lot of medicines which are ineffective and which should not be used. The Minister has said himself that he intends to make €100 million in savings in drugs over the next. So some of those savings should be invested in new and innovative drugs. It's not an either or. I
completely agree, and we are not spending the health budget as efficiently as we should be. And of course we can make some savings that would be very useful, and they could be invested in new treatments.
Do you think the 10%, for instance, the Katie Murphys out there, if you were a guessing man, which you're probably not, but if you were, will they get that drug paid for?
I think that they probably will in some shape or form. It may be a little bit of a delay, and that may be a big problem, but I suspect they will in the medium term. It's just trying to get to a situation where we can do it at a reasonable price with evidence being collected also about the longer term effects so that we know with more certainty in the future whether this is really having the effects that we hope it will.
Charles Norman, Philip Watt, thank you both very much for coming in tonight. And that is it for tonight.